Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Gulsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
Well, hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Wild Turkey Science, and continuing with our habitat-focused episode series. This is, in response to a lot of messages that we've gotten from listeners who maybe share, concerns with us about their turkey populations, and along with that say that they're not really aware of any habitat changes that have occurred in the areas that they hunt, own, or manage. And we recorded last week with John Grucci, and he kind of gave a southern perspective on that. The week before, Marcus and I both kind of talked in more generalities. It was a southeastern focused perspective, but we also branched outside of the southeast region as well. And today we have on with us a very special guest, Mary Jo Caselena from the Pennsylvania Game Commission. And Mary Jo is the turkey program leader for Pennsylvania. Is that the correct title, Mary Jo?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I usually just say I'm the turkey biologist. Yeah.
You're the lead turkey biologist for the state of Pennsylvania anyway.
Right.
And it's our pleasure to have you on. Welcome to the podcast. And we're hoping to talk to you a little bit today about, some landscape scale habitat changes that have occurred in Pennsylvania relative to turkeys, and then maybe some property level stuff as well that landowners might look out for.
Well, thank you very much, Will and Marcus. I really appreciate being on here today. So where would you like to start?
Well, maybe you could start and just kind of give us a general feel for what's the status, even if you're just talking in your state, like what's the status of turkeys, and then we could move on from there to talk a little bit about how things have changed just in the last few decades.
Yeah. Well, I guess I can kind of talk about the status in terms of how things have changed as well, because, back in the 1990s to just till last year, 2021, our spring harvest data was determined by harvest per square mile for the state, as well as our within our 23 wildlife management units across the state, and that model worked well. So it was, while our population model was based on spring harvest, similar to a lot of states, and as well as harvest rates, but spring harvest rate data were from a study that we conducted from 2006 to 2009. And so since the early 2000s, well, since about 2010, we've noticed that the number of spring turkey hunters every year has been fluctuating, and to the point where the last 6 or 7 years it's actually been significantly declining. And now we see, if we look from the year 2000 to 2022, this past year, we look at the number of turkey hunters as well as the number of days hunting, that has actually significantly declined. And the reason why I bring this up is because that we realize that has kind of messed us up in terms of the turkey population model, because our model was based on static, a stable turkey hunting population. So, a stable hunter population and hunter effort.
So basically participation, you're kind of assuming was staying the same year to year.
Yeah.
And it had, and so it had been for years. It was, right around 230,000. And now we have less than 200,000, and we have some years we have like 170,000. So we realized that that model needed to be adjusted, but we also realized that our spring harvest density, or our spring harvest rates were probably changing. So we needed current information of spring harvest rates.
Hmm.
At what rate are we pulling out? Are we harvesting those males? Um, and so in 2000 in 2009 or in 2020, we started a statewide leg banding program again. So, it's just your basic marking recapture study. We mark a certain number of gobblers every winter in each wildlife management unit, and then we determine, from leg band returns, what percentage of those leg banded gobblers we get back in the spring harvest, and that's our spring harvest rate. And so, lo and behold, spring harvest rates have also declined. So, at for a 10-year period, we thought we assumed turkey populations in Pennsylvania were declining because we had lower spring
Hmm.
harvests, but we didn't have current data on spring harvest rates. And then we looked at hunter numbers, and we saw hunter numbers were declining. So so now we've gone back and we've reanalyzed the spring harvest data using harvest per hunter
Hmm.
effort. So harvest per 100 days hunted. So we can standardize that harvest much better. And now we have current spring harvest rate data again. And and the nice thing about this current spring harvest rate data is we have it by wildlife
Hmm.
management unit. Back in 2006 to 2009, that was a study that we did in cooperation with New York and Ohio. It was a huge project funded by NWTF, by the way, and the state chapters of NWTF. But in any event, that was that study just gave us the statewide harvest rate. And now we've seen that harvest rates actually can be different, which
Hmm.
you would expect in some wildlife management units versus others. We have quite
So,
varied
oh,
landscapes within Pennsylvania. So,
sure,
so,
sure.
um, so all of this allows us to know that, uh, the long term, say from 2000 to 2022, statewide, turkey populations are stable. However, by wildlife management unit, they can vary. So, in the majority of our wildlife management units, the long term, and I'm
Hmm.
talking long term turkey populations are stable. There's a few where turkey populations are actually significantly increasing, and there's a few that where the population is significantly declining, and a few that are kind of on the cusp
Hmm.
of decline. And so those data aren't published in a scientific journal yet. We did post it, to our board of commissioners at a public meeting just this past January. But I can share with you that PowerPoint presentation that my supervisor Ken Duran
Hmm.
provided. If you'd
Yeah, that'd
like,
be
I
great.
can certainly do
As
that.
it,
But it was really interesting because, I mean, it kind of, makes us step back and realize, I've been trying to manage turkey populations in Pennsylvania at like a 3 to 5 year trend period, and you know, you both are turkey biologists. You understand that because of reproductive behavior being and recruitment just being so varied from one year to the next, we really need to look at populations at a longer term
hmm.
scale. And so now the question is, okay, so we figure probably around 10-15 year scale is where we can really get an understanding of what's going on with the turkey populations in Pennsylvania. Um, and the paper that my colleagues and I published in the 11th symposium of the National Wild Turkey Symposium back in 2015 also, discussed long-term trends, but I don't know, sometimes it's difficult to manage at that level when hunters are always thinking of the
Hmm.
short term. They're thinking about, what happened last year, what happened the last 3 years. 5 years is a long term for hunters to
Hmm.
think back at. Unless people keep specific records of their own harvests. And so then that kind of leads so in general for turkey population status in Pennsylvania, let's go back, short term. Okay, the last 2 years, the last 2 summers, 2022, 2021, we had really good recruitment. We had excellent summer reproduction. 2021 was due to, well, and I speak statewide again, okay, but it varied according to wildlife management unit. In our southern units, where we had the 17-year cicada hatch, then recruitment was pretty much record, almost record setting in some areas.
Well, that's good news.
Um, Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, and then, and that brings up another point, which I'll get into in a minute or so. But then 2022 was also a really good year. So, for example, and this is really good for Pennsylvania, 3.1 poults per
Hmm.
hen, and that's poults per
Yeah.
all
Wow.
hens. And so, yeah, so I can't speak for other states, but that's a very good recruitment for PA
So was
for the current status of turkey populations. I'm not talking about, during
right. So
restoration,
which year
but
was the near record setting? Did you say was that 21 or 20?
well, 2021, I mean, both years actually was 3.1 poults per hen, and
21 and 22.
so
Yeah.
yeah. So both of them were excellent years, and so, yeah, 2021 was kinda record-setting in some of our wildlife management units, but then boom, 2022, we had just as great recruitment, and, but, as a biologist, I was thinking, "Well, wait a second, that doesn't make much sense." I would think that in 2023, we'd have another really good year, right? Because all of those poults that were produced in 2021, there were first-year birds in 2022. And, we all know that, jakes don't do much breeding and juvenile hens don't typically add that much to the reproductive effort of the population. So that would mean 2023, you'd expect high recruitment again. Um, so I don't know the answer to why we had really good recruitment in 2022, but we did have good weather. We had dry, warm weather during the peak of hatch, and so that could have been related to that recruitment being so great. So let's keep our fingers crossed for 2023, right? So,
Right.
um, but
I want to, if I can,
okay, go
I'd
ahead.
like to back up. Yeah, I'd like to back up and ask you a question about something you said earlier. You mentioned um, that you've realized a decrease in hunter numbers, and you realized a difference in spring harvest rate. When you're talking about spring harvest rate, were you talking about the proportion of gobblers that were banded in that study that were being killed?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I was just making sure. So, along with that decrease in hunter numbers, you have seen a decrease in the proportion of gobblers from a given population that were being harvested.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
And do you mind sharing, what the average harvest rate was for adult gobblers?
Yes. So for adult gobblers, back in 2006 to 2009, um, okay, let me make sure I give you the correct numbers. Um,
I know I put you on the spot.
yeah, yeah. Let's see. So Well, I have so many numbers in my head. I just want to make sure I get this correct. So from 2006 to 2009, um, the gobbler harvest rates were about 38%. So 38% of our adult gobblers were being
Uh-huh.
harvested, and for the first 3 years of winter trapping, well, of trapping and getting harvest rate data currently, so 2020 to 2022. The 2023 data haven't been analyzed, obviously, because we haven't gone through our spring harvest yet. It's decreased from 38% to 25% state that statewide. So that's your adult
Okay.
gobblers, and then
Right.
Jake's back in 26 to 2009, 25% of our Jakes were being harvested on an annual basis, and now it's 8.5%.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, wow.
I'm talking significant
Hmm.
decreases in
Yeah,
harvest
that's
rates.
quite a
Yeah,
decrease. Yeah.
and I want to plug hunters a little bit there because that's great management. I mean, because it in terms of let me back up. In terms of the Jake harvest rate being so much lower than the adult harvest rate, that's great population management because those Jakes, we found that, Jakes have a high natural survival to, you know, to the next age class. So if 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 you're a Jake and you survive the spring gobbler season, you have a very high probability of making it to the next gobbler season, which
Hmm.
is
Mhm.
the fun
Hmm.
2-year-old gobblers that everybody loves
Right.
to listen to, because they're just
Yeah.
always gobbling
Hmm.
all day long.
That's why I was asking
Um,
you which year,
and they're
so that we could. Okay, 23 ought to be very good. 24 ought to be really good. I was thinking of the same thing. That 2-year-old
yeah,
gobbler hatch. That's really
yeah,
good.
yeah.
I have a hard enough time killing a turkey. It'd be
Uh,
impossible without those 2-year-olds out there.
Yeah, I know, tell me about
So,
it. Yeah, but I mean, but it's great that turkey hunters just naturally allow, jakes to walk because of that natural recruitment into the adult, population.
mhm.
So,
yeah.
but I mean, when I first started turkey hunting, it didn't matter to me what it was. If it was a bearded bird, it was down,
Mhm.
but,
Right.
as you mature as a hunter, then you like the challenge,
Mhm.
and you like that challenge of the older age
Absolutely.
class birds. Yeah. But
Yeah.
it's that
Yeah.
that
This is
in and
a
of itself is a great population
Mhm.
management tool that hunters
right.
just, they just naturally have, which is
Sure.
fantastic.
Yeah, this is an interesting part of this whole conversation. You can ask Marcus. I've been bugging him about it nonstop here lately. But I just feel like, personally, I just from what I see, taking off the scientist hat, um, I see increasing popularity of spring turkey hunting. But then you look at a lot of state agency data, and it indicates, turkey hunter numbers are declining in a lot of places.
Yeah.
And it seems like Pennsylvania is one of those. And so that's just, I don't know, it's perplexing to me, and I haven't been able to reconcile this apparent increase in the popularity of the sport while at the same time seeing state agency data indicating decreases.
So
So,
I looked at the age, I looked at hunter ages every year. The age of the general average age of our hunters just keeps clicking up and up and up and up. And so I think what we're getting to is just hunters are just aging out. They're just getting to the point where they just
mhm,
can't go out anymore. We do have in Pennsylvania, we have excellent recruitment of young hunters, but they just cannot, and I don't think they ever will catch up to the number of hunters that we used to have in our heyday. I mean, we had well over a million hunters in Pennsylvania. That general
yeah,
hunters. Um, so, I mean, it's just we just well, it's because of the aging population, and
hmm,
yeah, and it just goes to show that we really need to continue that recruitment of the young hunting public and population. And it's funny because, yeah, I think, a lot of our hunters has switched from fall turkey hunting to spring turkey hunting. In Pennsylvania, the spring season was closed for a number of years until 1968, and then that's when the spring season opened again. But fall hunting in Pennsylvania was the tradition, and we closed the fall season for only a couple of years, way back in the in the 1930s, 1940s or something. Um, but yeah, it was the fall season was the tradition, and thankfully,
Mm-hmm.
we've been able to, and, as a turkey manager, for state government, that fall harvest is in Pennsylvania, at least, that fall harvest, has more additive mortality than our spring season, simply because our spring season opens during the peak of nest incubation. So,
Mm-hmm.
whereas other states begin the spring season during egg laying or even during mating season, in Pennsylvania, we have it's delayed until the peak of incubation, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's really the fall season where you can harvest a male or a female, where you have higher probability of at that additive mortality factor, because we know that if a hen survives the fall hunting season, then she has very high probability of surviving to the next spring, right? I mean, that winter flock, they flock in the winter for a reason, right? For that security, as well as to take advantage of the food resources. But that winter flocking is really important um, for the young birds to basically get educated as to how to survive, as well as just having that large flock to avoid predators. So, yeah, so if they survive the fall hunting season, then they have very high probability of surviving to the next spring. So really, in Pennsylvania, we since restoration was complete in about 2000, 2003, then we have been decreasing fall hunting opportunities, whenever we have seen decreasing population trends. And so part of that decrease in fall turkey hunter numbers is was regulated by our season structure, but also I think some of it also had to do with hunters aging out, like I talked about with the spring season. But then also in the fall, there's a lot more archery uh, archery deer hunting opportunities in Pennsylvania than there ever have been in the past. And so the last 15 years, archery hunting opportunities have just been increasing and increasing. And you can only do so much, right? When you have all of your hunting seasons open at the same time, you kind of have to pick and choose. And also we've also taken the opening day of the fall turkey hunting season. We've separated that from the general small game opener, so that we have less incidental take of turkeys.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
yeah, and then the reason why we got rid of the rifle implement during the fall season was to decrease that incidental take again. But
Right.
that's all fall. But see, I'm saying, I'm kind of pushing away the fall season structure, and but in Pennsylvania, the fall season, is that fall season management is just as important as the spring season management. So we really have to look at both of them combined.
Yeah, that is an interesting situation to be in. I know that, in not only Pennsylvania, but other portions of the Northeast, that fall turkey hunting tradition is much more prevalent and really culturally valued than it is
Hmm.
in other parts of the country.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that adds another layer of complexity to for
Yeah.
managing those populations that some managers in other states don't necessarily
Yeah,
have to deal
Mary
with.
Jo, do you have a feel for how many turkeys get harvested in the spring versus the fall, just as percentage wise? Like what?
Yeah, about so we average around 37,000 harvest harvested in the spring, and we're at or less than 10,000 now in
Okay.
the fall. And it used to be vice
Yeah. Yeah.
versa. Yeah.
Well, that's
So,
really interesting. That's
yeah.
definitely a much
And,
higher
you know,
proportion than the other numbers from other states that I've heard in terms of what percentage are in the fall. So you have about a 20% or a quarter in the fall, it sounds like.
yeah. Yeah, about a quarter. Yeah.
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 Well, that's
So,
interesting. And it's also interesting. We talked
yeah,
to Coulter Chitwood from Oklahoma State, and they just had a recent meta analysis that he came on and talked about, and he really put into perspective how important adult females are in populations, and I
Adult
yeah.
female
So,
survival in
and I
particular.
yeah.
suspect that a large portion of the females harvested are in the fall season, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because the spring season it's bearded birds only. So, yeah, if it's a bearded hen, it's legal, and obviously, that's gonna be
Hmm.
an adult hen, right? 'Cause by the
Mhm.
time she shows a beard, she's an adult bird. But that's, 1% or less than 1%
Hmm.
of the harvest,
Right.
and lately it's been less than 1%. So, yeah, so you're you're it's really the fall harvest. We estimate the fall harvest to be about 60% hens. So if you're taking 10,000 birds out of the population, that's 6,000 are hens.
Hmm.
Um, that's our current estimate. We're trying to get some better estimates on that, because that's from self-reporting.
Hmm.
And so we ask the hunters if we ask them uh, we ask them to tell us the color of the tip of the breast
Hmm.
feather, right? If it's black, we know it's male. If it's brown, we know it's female. And
Mhm.
then we ask them about the tail fan. If it's a full fan, then
Hmm.
it's an adult, and if it's not a full fan, then if has longer central rectrices, then it's a juvenile. But because with the hens, you can't ask them what the spur and
Yeah.
beard
Hmm.
length are, right? So,
Well,
um,
Right.
but yeah, we're trying to get some better estimates of that.
yeah, apparently you can in southern Florida. We had a bunch of our hens that we captured this year had spurs, which was interesting. I've never heard that from anybody else. Uh,
Now, did they have spurs and
no,
beards,
just
or
spurs.
just spurs?
Really interesting. I've never
Oh,
seen that anywhere else
interesting.
or heard of it. I know. I mean, occasionally you may have one, but it was like 3 of 30 or something like that.
If they
Oh
had
my goodness.
spurs and beards, I may have had to come down there and make sure that Marcus knew what he was doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Marcus, this
No,
is not a hen.
they,
a friend of mine harvested a female hen on my property just years and years ago, and we were pheasant hunting, and it was during the overlap season, and this hen flushed up, and it was on my property. I said shoot, because that hen, I was pretty darn sure that hen um was a barren hen that was always in that part of my property, and she was a barren hen like 3 years in a row. I'm like, we got to get that gene flow out of the population, shoot it, and here it was a spurred and bearded hen. So
Wow.
yeah, so that was very unusual. I mean, that's so I've
Yeah, it
been.
sounds like some kind of genetic anomaly.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because we all know that spurred hens and bearded hens can breed, and they're very successful, but that particular bird wasn't. So, and
Right.
oddly enough, I mean, this is totally anecdotal data, but oddly enough, the next year there was a hen that was in that part of my property that had a brood. So go figure.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, it kind of makes sense with what we know about, hens liking the spatial segregation during nesting.
Yeah,
Maybe she was occupying that area of the property during nesting, and removing her allowed another hen to come in.
yeah, yeah. So.
Huh.
Mhm.
yeah,
Fascinating.
Yeah, and
So,
Marcus, that's
now that
fascinating
yeah.
information too
Well,
about those spurred hens in
ours did
Florida.
at least attempt to nest. So we have two of them on. They're incubating currently. So they were definitely hens. will.
Right.
If they're
They were
if
not
they're males,
misidentified.
something really is getting weird now. Yeah. So that,
So kind of changing gears now. We wanted to have you on really to talk about those landscape level changes for turkeys, in Pennsylvania in particular. And we knew, we had heard about you, being an accomplished turkey biologist ahead of time, and being in that part of the country. We figured you would be adept at talking about this. But one thing that we learned talking to you before we even started recording is that you were a co-author on a paper that was kind of focused on this exact topic a few years ago. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that was we presented that at the 11th symposium, with the National Wild Turkey Symposium. So that was what was the my co-authors were Mike Schiavone from New York Department of Environmental Conservation, Andrea Bowling, and at the time she was a postdoc at Michigan State University, and then our veterinarian at the time for Pennsylvania Game Commission, Dr. Justin Brown, who's now at Penn State, and then my supervisor Ian Gregg at the time. So it was the the title of that paper. I could probably I could send you a copy of it, but it's understanding the new normal: wild turkeys in a changing northeastern landscape. And so because at the time the Northeast Upland Game Bird Technical Committee was dealing with trying to understand the changing population levels within the Northeast states. And so this was, going. I mean, this paper was published in 2015, and so we used data from 1990 to 2013 for the publication. So during the period of like 2010 to 2013, all the northeastern states were saying, well, we don't understand what's going on with our turkey populations, and our turkey populations in the Northeast declining, and if so, why? And so it was like kind of like the new normal, because we had all kind of grown up with in turkey management, during the the period where it was all, we were doing the trap and transfer, and we were just reeling in the realization of all of that turkey expansion, and and then all of a sudden, boom, turkey populations aren't expanding anymore. And I think you guys hit the nail on the head in your last episode when you were talking about um, that during that expansion stage, habitat was changing, but we couldn't see that because recruitment was so high and populations were expanding so much that it didn't matter what we did with the habitat. It didn't matter what we did with population, with harvest management, because recruitment was just so high. But then, when we completed restoration and recruitment kind of, settled back down to normal levels, then all of a sudden we started seeing, oh, okay, well, maybe turkeys can't nest anywhere on the landscape and succeed. And
mhm.
maybe all of this harvesting that we've been doing that is not benefiting oak regeneration, is not is causing some problems, and maybe we need to focus our harvest management differently. And then so then we started looking at harvest or timber management, and realize, oh shoot, you know our our woods are way too old. We really need to increase our timber management. And and then we're looking at the species composition of what we have on our landscape. We realized that our oaks hadn't been regenerating, and And the landscape, our woods, our forest land, is being repopulated with fire. We call fire intolerant species like
Hmm.
maples and other
Hmm.
species that, especially red maples in Pennsylvania, that don't have much wildlife, benefit. And so it's funny because people will say, "Well, my woods look the same. My woods, I have trees. I have trees everywhere." Yeah, but what type of trees do you have? And
Yeah.
and are your oaks, are your oaks even producing acorns? If you have an entire stand of white oaks, but you don't have any red oak complex, your red oak family species, then what if you have a late frost 2 years in a row? Well, your white oak acorns produce every single year. So if you have late frost 2 years in a row, then you've got 2 years in a row where you have no acorn production. Well, if you have red oaks in there
Hmm.
too, they mature at a 2 year interval. So yeah, maybe that if you had say if you had a late frost, in year one, but then again in year three, well then that year two you could have, well, I mean, I don't anyway, I guess what I'm saying is if you kinda getting
Yeah,
myself hung up.
you would have at least 1 year of production,
Of
and
pr
out of that 3 years, whereas in the other scenario, you'd have no production.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So you'd, having I guess my point is, having woodlands that have oaks, that are in the white oak as well as the red oak, families, provides you with just, better ability to have consistent oak reproduction.
Hmm.
Oh, and I don't know if it was
Hmm.
Marcus or Will, you were talking about, chestnuts, losing the
Hmm.
chestnuts in your last
Yeah.
episode. Yeah, and that was, oh gosh, the wonderful thing about the chestnuts, the American chestnut, is they flower much later
Hmm.
than your
Hmm.
oaks. So
Yeah.
they never have the late frosts never affect
Hmm.
them, or hardly ever,
Right.
and so there's so much more
More
prolific
consistent. Yeah.
of a nut producing. Yeah, and man, if we could get those American chestnuts back on the landscape, I know the Chestnut Foundation and even the, Pennsylvania Game Commission is cooperating with them, and as well as our Pennsylvania Department of Conservation Natural Resources. We're
Mm.
really trying to get some uh, other mass producers on the landscape. But um, so that's one of the biggest aspects of habitat change for our wooded environment is is just the fact that the oaks aren't regenerating like they had been. So the Game Commission, and DCNR too, Department of Conservation Natural Resources, uh, have been really pushing for more prescribed fire, and so we're really looking at more of a landscape level habitat
Mhm.
management. And so we're up to, I think we have, last in the last few years, we've been trying to get about 200,000 acres per year, um, burned on, and this is just
Mhm.
game lands, right? So we have 1.5 million acres of state game lands in Pennsylvania. So we do have the ability
Hmm.
to do a lot of habitat
Mhm.
management on, within Pennsylvania. Um, but let's see. I'm trying to think, trying to see if I'm giving that if I'm giving a correct number or not. Um, but then, gypsy moth, spongy moth, defoliation, that's obviously caused a lot of mortality, oak mortality in the mid-Atlantic states. So some of this stuff that I speak about, is not only occurring in Pennsylvania, but it's occurring across the mid-Atlantic states. The New England states, does have an oak component, but they have more of a northern hardwood um, component as well. So really, the maturation of force, lack of fire. We've suppressed fire for so many years, so we're really trying to get more fire on the landscape. That loss of American chestnuts, but also in Pennsylvania, the conversion from agriculture to woodland habitat has been another aspect of habitat change. And it's funny because, some people don't see that, but I've lived in my part of the state since 1999, and you just going through the woods or just driving along the road, I can see so many areas that had been farmland, or at least, you know, small farms are now are becoming woodlands. And so some of that is good for turkeys. I mean, you like that conversion. You like that early successional uh, conversion of habitat for nesting structure and nesting habitat and brood rearing habitat. So that's a benefit. But, if you're looking at from 2000 to 2023, that's a 23-year period. You're we've lost that ability to provide good brood rearing habitat for turkeys in 25-year-old stage woodlands. So
Mm-hmm.
the other thing that Pennsylvania has is we have the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program in PA. So it's a cooperative program with NRCS, as well as Pheasants Forever, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and some other NGOs and other state agencies. So that it's Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. So we provide extra incentive to farmers to keep land, um, out of production, but keep it in an agricultural type of setting. Uh, and it's kind of based on, well, actually nowadays you can become involved with the CREP program in Pennsylvania and any county except for Philadelphia County. When we first started it, it was just the counties that surround the Chesapeake Bay because of erosion control and water quality, water quality
Mm-hmm.
enhancement. But now it's across the entire state, and so that has been helpful because you're keeping you're you know you're keeping land out of you know high production, so you're not tilling the property, and you can't mow the that land during the months of April 1st to July 30th, right? So during nesting seasons. And so we're trying to create better grassland habitat for all grassland species, and so that's a nice incentive program. So it's a payment per acre, and on average, and so Pennsylvania, we pay about $100 per acre. That's the average. It goes from anywhere from $50 per acre to $200 per acre, depending on which county the person is in. But so that's a program that can only benefit wildlife, right? So um,
Mary Jo, what?
so in terms of
Sorry,
habitat,
I've just had
go
a
ahead.
question about that program. What? Who qualifies for that? What are the qualifications to enroll?
I don't remember what the acreage is, but you have to be a farm. You don't have to have like your entire income from farming. You just have to own acreage, and I apologize. I don't know if it's 10-acre minimum. It's not a very large minimum, but I can't remember what the acreage is. I
That's fine.
apologize for that.
So
Um,
basically, it's just like it's focused on ag land. So if you have some sort of working land,
Yes, yeah. So it started out you had to be within 180 feet of a stream or highly erodible
Mm-hmm.
cropland. So yeah, so it'd be cropland. Um, well, highly erodible cropland that's over 180 feet from a stream, or if you have buffer practices, like if it's a contour buffer strip, if it's a grassed waterway, or if it's a wetland. But it did have to be in cropland to qualify.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess it's similar to some of the NRCS programs, for instance, like CRP. Things that we were talking about on the previous episode.
Yeah,
But that's a state.
yeah, it's CRP. This is the state enhancement. Um, so it's an additional. So it's an additional rental,
Mm-hmm.
and so we have 200. Well, the last time I checked, it was 265,000 acres
Mm-hmm.
in Pennsylvania. Which, I mean, so so what would that be in terms of Alabama land?
Y'all are
I
gonna put
got
me
you.
on the spot on this again.
It's like a
I don't have my Alabama
yeah.
calculator out
It's
today.
like a quarter of Alabama or something. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
So
uh,
one thing that I'm interested in, Mary Jo, is because you've mentioned brooding and nesting cover several times. That's something that we talk about as being a limited resource for turkey populations, throughout the country. And I'm under the impression that landowners in Pennsylvania probably don't burn nearly as much as landowners in Alabama. It's not as common a cultural practice, but I know that there are several folks working really hard to start to increase that practice in that part of the world. But what are the primary practices you would say right now that landowners are using to disturb those areas and maintain them in that nesting and brooding cover?
yeah, so most of that is just harvesting, and
Hmm.
because in Pennsylvania most of our private landowners do not
Mm-hmm.
you know don't practice prescribed fire.
Right.
There is some, but it's
Mm-hmm.
very minimal. Um, and so it really comes down to you know to spraying and cutting trees.
Mm-hmm.
So
Hmm.
and spraying invasives. Unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, probably everywhere, invasive control is really a
Mm-hmm.
problem. Invasive shrubs, autumn olive, honeysuckle, but also ivies. We have all these different kinds of ivies that are really they make an area impenetrable, and so a hen isn't going to be able to use that habitat because she doesn't have an escape
Mm-hmm.
route. If she can, if there's a hole, and if there is an escape route, then it might be usable. But yeah, we have just a lot of areas that are becoming impenetrable, and so because of invasives. So people are spending the money to do it themselves, to get rid of invasives either by hand or by spraying. And I'm involved with a woodland owners association that does a lot of education. Its whole sole purpose, it's through Penn State, and sole purpose is to educate woodland owners on responsible management of their woodland habitat. Any landowner who has 10 acres or more of woodland habitat can be involved with these woodland owners associations. And so there, we try to explain to people um, you know how to have responsible timber harvest, and how to not do diameter limit cuts of just taking out the big stuff. People still to this
Hmm.
day think that the and you have an even aged woodland, but there's all different sized trees in there, and they don't realize that the small trees are the same size as the big trees. They're
Mm-hmm.
just inferior. So, genetically inferior. So, cutting out the big trees, having a diameter limit cut, and and just cutting out the big trees is not good management. You're leaving the
Mm.
inferior trees there. And so, so we're trying to explain to people how to create, a good timber harvest on their landscape. But, but we don't have quite a grasp on what's the best nesting habitat for turkeys in Pennsylvania. And that's one of the things that that we're trying to answer with this research study, which we'll get into later. But, when I first became a turkey biologist in 1999, it was very common to see a, a, a hen nesting up against a pole-sized tree in the woods without any cover around. And you're like, well, geez, how's she going to successfully manage that hatch? I mean, she's out in the
Probably not a
open.
good idea.
Right, right. And that was pretty standard. But I mean, maybe it's just because turkey populations were so high that their productivity, productivity wasn't that important. Or maybe, maybe there was um, a limit in terms of, habitat for those particular hens. So they got pushed out into the lesser quality habitats. But hopefully we can get some answers to those questions with this current research study. But so in terms of getting back to your question on what landowners can do, uh, creating different types of habitats on your property, and then also looking at what's on the surrounding property. So, if you're in mostly wooded habitat, then creating some openings, are good for brood habitat. But then creating that brushy transition between that, what we call a food plot. I don't like to use food plot. A grassy opening, and then graduation into that shrubby type, larger, taller um, uh, vegetative cover, and then into your mature woodland. But then in your mature woodland, make sure that there's some horizontal structure. Oh gosh, in Pennsylvania, there's so many woods that you can just look straight through the woods. It's a mature woodland. And people will say, yeah, this has been mature woodland forever. Yes, but you've had an overpopulation of deer for 15 years. And so the deer have eaten everything up to 6 feet tall. So there is nothing for a turkey to hide from, hide from predators. So create some of that horizontal structure, put some just put some brush piles in until you can get some brambles growing up, and plant some shrubs, create a small opening, just fall a couple of trees and let those trees lay, or take the boles out and leave the tops of the trees and leave that structure there so that you can't look straight into your woods. And that's a big thing in Pennsylvania and a lot of the Northeast, where you have those overabundant deer populations. I could go on, but I should probably stop.
No, that's good stuff, and a lot of landowners may be completely unaware that they can select those lower value to wildlife trees like the red maples you were talking about earlier, and it may be adjacent to a white oak that now can expand its crown out into that space that the red maple was occupying. And so by felling that tree, you maybe get a little bit of sunlight on the ground and you stimulate some understory vegetation for a while. But also that white oak crown starts expanding out, and yeah, it'll eventually fill up some of that space left behind and intercept light going to the ground. But you've increased potential acorn production for that tree by increasing that crown diameter. So there's lots of things to think about, and benefits of potentially felling some of those trees that'll come online later on down the road.
Yeah, I was going to
Yes,
add as
exactly.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. So looking towards the future. Oh, go ahead, Marcus.
Oh, I was going to add. I really started to appreciate some of the challenges up in the Northeast, in Pennsylvania, actually. I came up to a few years back to give a presentation, and I've been up there a few times for this particular reason, but and the one that really resonates with me, I was at the Prescribed Fire Council, the Pennsylvania Prescribed Fire Council, giving a presentation on burning in hardwoods, which I've done a fair amount of research on in various contexts, and man, there were a lot of people who were not very happy with me. We'll just put it that way. Even at the Prescribed Fire Council, talking about burning and up on hardwoods, and it actually stimulated a couple of things. And one of them, I wrote an article, but we essentially went through the literature and figured out how burning in hardwoods affected the quality of oak timber. There have been a whole bunch of studies on that, and we quantified that and then compared it to other practices that you might use to manage for deer. And even if you do cause some damage, which the literature suggests that it will be somewhere in the 1 to 3% loss range, it still was more economically valuable than most of the other things that you do in terms of producing deer forage. So I thought that was really interesting, but it was because of the response that I got in Pennsylvania from folks talking about burning in hardwoods. That was, obviously a real barrier, the fear of damaging the timber. So we can put the link to that article in the show notes, so that if you're interested, you can go look at that. But I just thought it was interesting for me, as someone who's from the South, where burning is a much bigger part of the culture, especially up on hardwoods even. And then going up there, it was actually in Pennsylvania where I started to appreciate, the barriers and how they might change across, different parts of the nation. So,
Marcus, when was that? What year was that?
that was probably 2020. I think it was in February of 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, when I came and gave the presentation, and I wrote a follow-up article.
So that does still occur in Pennsylvania to a degree, but thankfully the Pennsylvania Game Commission, is really, we're full bore prescribed fire, and DCNR, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, Forest, they manage all of our state forest lands. They're getting more into prescribed fire. But as you get up into New England, it some areas of New England is, it's still, fire is not accepted in a lot of areas, and it's not accepted by a lot of private landowners. I mean, it's weird because, landowners in the Southeast, it's no big deal, but I mean, Smokey
Well,
the
you'd be
Bear is
surprised.
still
We
very
still face a
prevalent.
little bit of pushback here and there.
Yeah, especially in upland
Yeah.
hardwood stands. That's a major.
Oh yeah.
There's a perceived barrier there from folks introducing fire in that type of forest, even here.
I guess we get most pushback when we do, when we do growing season burns in Pennsylvania because of turkey nesting and other nesting. But it's difficult in Pennsylvania, especially, you have the window of opportunity for prescribed fire is very limited. So sometimes we have to do growing season burns, and yeah, I mean, we might burn a few turkey nests in the process, but the overall benefit to the population as a whole is what we look at. That's what we have to look at. I mean, unfortunately, you're gonna have some short-term losses, but it's the long-term gains that we're really looking for.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and we just had an episode on burning during nesting and covered several of the research contributions on the subject. So if folks are listening to this and you want to know about those impacts, you might be quite surprised. We just had an episode recently on that.
Yeah, so that was a really good overview of habitat conditions for turkeys in Pennsylvania. Um, is there, before we transition into talking about the research that you've got ongoing up there, is there anything that you'd like to share with landowners as far as resources, and hunters too, of course, resources that they may be able to tap into if they want to make some improvements to their properties to try to benefit turkey populations?
Yeah, so in Pennsylvania, we have the private lands program, and so if you're a landowner, you have to own, oh boy, I forget how many acres it is. I think it's either 35 or 50 acres, but you'll have to check with with the game commission. And I used to have those numbers off the top of my head. I guess I'm getting old, but so for private landowners, we have a public access program, and so if you allow hunting on your property, then we also will will cooperate with you in terms of coming onto your property and providing you with habitat management opportunities and suggestions, and we'll offer you free tree seedlings and shrub seedlings, free nest boxes and whatnot. And so we have a biologist that will come onto your property and help you to write a management plan, and then we can help you with the different incentive programs with the U.S. government, or with our own state agency in terms of cost share for habitat management on your property. So that's our private lands um, uh, you know program with just within Pennsylvania, just within the Pennsylvania Game Commission. But of course, NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which usually have an office in each county, then the NRCS has a lot of cooperative projects through the federal farm bill and other programs. So I would suggest to not only contact the Pennsylvania Game Commission, but also to contact the local NRCS office. And then, of course, Penn State has the Penn State Cooperative Extension Program. So, and we have extension offices in every county. And so those folks also are very helpful in terms of providing some landowner, uh, you know, um, um, opportunities, and just some answer questions, and they can provide some really good advice.
It sounds like y'all have a pretty active prescribed fire council there
Mhm.
in the state too, right?
Yes, yeah, we do for sure. And yeah, there. So I'm not too familiar with that, but I know that everybody within the game commission um, that's that gets into the prescribed fire management, does have to be certified through the council and whatnot. So it's very active in
Mhm.
Pennsylvania. But before we get into other aspects of this talk, I did want to talk about, so habitat is one aspect of one factor in regulating turkey populations. And uh, and so that paper that I was talking about, we look at kind of five environmental factors, habitat being the one, being like the umbrella um, factor. And then you also have, um, so the other four factors that we didn't talk about, which I want to talk about quickly, is first off, the changes in our weather patterns, because that we can see has had some impact on recruitment, and the habitat. But besides, so habitat, weather patterns, predator communities, perhaps in a way, but disease. There's unknown factors regarding disease, and especially in the Northeast, and then hunting
Mhm.
mortality. But in Pennsylvania, as I talked about before, our spring season, we feel pretty good about allowing, that we have somewhat of a liberal, well, no, we have a conservative spring hunting season, but we also allow a second bird to be harvested if you purchase a second tag. One tag comes with your general license for spring. One tag comes with your license for fall. But then, if you would like to purchase a second spring tag, you may do so for
Hmm.
an extra fee. Uh, so really, so the fifth factor is really more of the fall hunting mortality, which I think we have a pretty good handle on now that we've restricted fall harvest in the wildlife management units where our population trends have been declining. So really, I guess what I wanted to talk about is quickly is the changes of our weather patterns, unknown disease factors, and predator communities. And if you think of habitat as your umbrella, then with all of this habitat change that we've been seeing and allowing across the landscape, you provide, it's creating more holes in your umbrella, right? And so the overarching ability of that umbrella to keep that turkey hen warm and dry, especially during the nesting season, just it deteriorates as um, you know well, when you have changes in weather patterns and when you have increased diseases, and just either even the normal predation levels of your on
Hmm.
your population. So I guess what I'm saying is the deleterious effects of predators can be can be seen as larger effects when you have poor habitat and you have diseases and you have these changing weather patterns. And it's difficult because at this point we don't know how to change weather patterns, and unless we can get a handle on greenhouse emissions. But those in the northeast portion of the United States, we have and I apologize. I only really focus on the Northeast and Pennsylvania because that's kind of that's where my job and takes me.
No, that's why I
But
wanted to talk to you.
yeah, but we have seen um, more winter and spring weather events during the last 15 years than we did, before. Well, even since 1960, and I think it's like the amount. So it's not only do we have more harsh weather events, but the weather events are producing more rainfall for each event. So
Hmm.
each event it causes more flooding, and just causes, just more rain on the landscape. So that's difficult if you're a nesting hen. Even if you're out of a flood zone, you could have your nest wiped away. Last year, for example,
Yeah, if you get a few
2020.
inches of rain in a few hours.
Yeah, and that's happening more and more often.
Mhm.
So,
Right.
and last year, this time of year, mid-April, we had up to a foot of snow in certain parts of Pennsylvania during this week. And so, if you're right now, mid-April is kind of like the beginning of the peak of egg laying in Pennsylvania for nesting hens. So if you're a
Hmm.
nesting hen and you have maybe a couple of eggs or even, six eggs laid in a nest and it gets covered in a foot of snow, you're not finding that nest. You're just saying, okay, to heck with that.
Hmm.
I'll have to go find somewhere else to nest. But you have to kind of, wait for the snow to stop falling, or I mean, it has a major effect
Mhm.
on your nesting. uh, Fortunately, last year we were able to overcome that because we did have good nesting overall nesting success and poult recruitment. We did have a lot of hens that were able to renest last year. But But with this happening over and over again, and more often, you have not only, weather events, but disease occurrences, and we really have no idea what impacts disease have on Pennsylvania Pennsylvania turkeys right now. But hunters are constantly saying predators are the problem, and I guess what I'm trying to tell people is it's all of those combined, all 5 factors combined, with habitat being the overarching, factor. So, is it the habitat's fault? Is it the predator's fault? Or is it the weather's fault? Or is it the disease's fault? It's everything combined.
Mhm.
So it I I hate when people always complain about high predator populations. Well, if there's good habitat, they can hide from the turkeys can hide from the predators. And if there's good habitat, they can get out of the rain. And so, there's that wet hen syndrome theory that people talk about, where a, a predator, a mammalian predator uh, that feeds himself from his olfactory senses, can smell a hen when she's soaked from the rain, and the predation rates will be increased during those heavy rain events. I don't know if that's true or not, but my point is, if she has good secure habitat, she can stay out of that rain event a little bit more, more
Mm.
effectively, and not become drenched as quickly as she would out in the open.
Also, the hen, if she does hatch, those little poults for first couple of weeks of life when they can't thermoregulate, it's just as or more important even, that she's able to escape the elements during that period. So all of those could have dramatic effects on productivity. Uh, yeah, and we have an option on habitat, not on the weather, in terms of changing that.
Yeah, and this is something that Marcus and I have talked about a lot. Maybe it's some of these issues that are coming to the forefront as driving turkey populations, whether it be predation, disease, um, you know, variable weather, all those types of things. Maybe they're only becoming problems because they're symptomatic of a larger issue related back to habitat. And when you have proper habitat in place, it makes those populations more resilient to those other factors.
Yes, exactly.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.